So first, join me in welcoming our first presenter, BioBac Trac LLC from West Des Moines.
Good afternoon, I'm Jordan Shaw, founder of BioBac Trac, a laboratory specializing in a novel method of identifying salmonella. If you've watched the news lately, I'm sure you've seen examples of food recalls and some illness outbreaks that have been dealing with salmonella. These are some examples you might have seen some close to home. People get sick, people die, executives go to jail, and companies go bankrupt. In fact, in the last 60 days, the FDA has issued 21 recalls dealing with salmonella alone. At $30 million per recall on average, and $3 billion in U.S. healthcare costs, makes salmonella the top pathogen when it comes to costs in the U.S. A little bit about the market. The Food Safety Modernization Act, also known as FSMA, is going to partially drive an increase in testing. We estimate the market in 2018 to be about $5 billion. Some other estimates have put that number as high as $15 billion. Dr. Bolden, the expert at the USDA who has developed this test, says that the U.S. market dealing specifically with salmonella serology is around 50,000 samples per year. The real pull will be in the international markets where those companies really struggle with finding this solution for them. A little bit of dinner trivia knowledge, there's over 2,500 types of salmonella. And so the moral of the story here is that there's a huge market for salmonella testing. If you're a food manufacturer and you don't test for salmonella, you're playing with fire. So by now, I hope I've convinced you that we need to be testing for salmonella. There are plenty of laboratories that do this, but there's a missing piece to the puzzle at the end of the process, and that's where we come in. Most labs don't have the capability or the desire to mess with this. And actually, we don't either, and that's why we have a new process. In fact, our product is better. We offer a molecular test, so you're targeting the DNA in salmonella. That gives this test almost 100% accuracy versus the 60 to 85% you get with the traditional methods. And we can do this for less than half in cost of the traditional methods. We've really simplified the process. When you're dealing with salmonella, you've got hazardous materials, infectious substances you have to ship. With the sample submission kit you have in front of you, we've really simplified that process. You put the sample on a card, you can drop it in UPS overnight without any kind of hazmat issues. I worked for commercial laboratories for the last 10 years, large international companies, and I've seen how they work. I really do think there's a better way we can serve the customers. So technology, online services, and personal attention. So this graph is a short example of how BioBac Trac is better than the competition in really every way. I mentioned the accuracy, BioBac Trac nails it. Shipping methods, you don't have to deal with infectious substance declarations. Paperwork, there's nothing you have to deal with. Customs, no issue. And we do this for, like I said, less than half. So how do we make money? It's simple, we test. Customers pay on a per test basis. And it's very simple, like I said. Your sample submission kit contains all the information you need. Instructions, a sample card, paperwork to fill out, hope to have it online later, and a self-label to return to the lab. The lab intakes the paperwork, processes the sample, and we provide the customer their results online in the lab today. Doing about 5,000 tests per year, it's very doable, 100 per week. At $50 a test, the lab can do a gross margin of about $180,000 a year. Our global impact, our community impact is global. When you talk about who needs to test for salmonella, we're talking about poultry exporters in Brazil who do 3.6% GDP in poultry export. Egg producers in Iowa, I'm sure you're all familiar with the issue we had in 2010. Third-party labs, the ones that don't want to mess with dealing with the process, they might outsource to me. Public health officials who are trying to trace down a salmonella outbreak. Academic researchers who can now afford to do more testing. And pet food manufacturers all across the board, food manufacturers in general, can now afford to do this better. The Dream Big Grow Here funds will help me initially start up the lab by purchasing equipment and reagents. So personal financing will provide the foundation, the investors, etc. But the Dream Big Grow Here money will really help push me over the finish line and make this possible. Once the lab is up and running, we'll do an initial marketing push via website, trade magazines, etc. Like I said, the international markets are a very big pull for this, and the sample submission kit makes this very possible. As a nice complement to our services, we can do routine micro-testing as well, the very first step of the salmonella test. As I said, the FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, is really bringing a lot of anxiety to the industry. They don't know what they're getting into. These are going to push a lot of regulations down. So consulting food safety experts can really bring some value add to our lab. There'll be plenty of opportunities for employment. As the sample volume increases, we need to add scientists and lab technicians, salespeople to beat the street, drive business into the lab, account managers, customer service to continue to drive that excellent service that we want to become known for. And like I said, those consultants are people who really know food safety. They'll be able to talk to customers, bring their comfort level up, and really walk them through the problems that they have dealing with salmonella. BioBac Trac, better product, better price, better process, better service. Thank you.